Hello, Facebook world. It is 7:59. We are getting ready to start our Education Week Teacher Facebook live chat, and we're early. That's just like educators, right?
Teachers are always on time.
More or less, right? Like, I think my record's not that good, but pretty good, pretty good. It is 8 o'clock. We'd like to welcome you to our Facebook Live session. My name is Megan Allen. I am a National Board Certified teacher. I just finally finished my doctorate. It only took me like 3 extra years. And I'm a former 4th grade teacher. I've worked in teacher education and I've worked in teacher leadership, and I'm currently the Director of Partnerships at the National Network of State Teachers of the Year. So my job is to support great teachers and teacher leaders so we can change the profession, make it better for every kid. But it's great to see everybody here, and I'd like to introduce my friend Carole.
Hi, so I'm Carole Learned-Miller. I am currently also working on my doctorate. I'm an EDLD student at Harvard, C6, and I was originally a 3rd grade teacher and then a principal for many years, and currently I'm working at the New York City Leadership Academy, which trains principals and superintendents and all central office staff to be very equity-minded leaders across the country. So happy to be here.
And I'm so happy you're here, Carole. This is so cool. This is way fun. And I think this is a unique situation, too. We're going to be diving into the world of adult learning. How do we make the switch from working with students to working with adults? And that can be, it can be coaching or principalship, but it can also be teaching full-time and then doing other work in leading adults. It could be leading PLCs. It could be facilitating professional development. It could be a hybrid role. It could be advocacy. The sky's the limit. But I think this is a really unique situation, unfortunately. But fortunately, but it's a unique situation. I'm going to nerd out for a second because, we have a principal and a former principal and a former teacher in the same room having conversation about this topic and these topics. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's about time.
Right. So, Carole, just to kick us off, when did you make the shift from working with students, like all the time, to starting to think about working with adults?
Mm-hmm. So I've been a 3rd grade teacher at 2 different schools. I really loved it. Then I took a series of courses, a master's program at Boston College, and for the first time I understood how if you are a principal, you really are very much a teacher, a lead teacher. And I was able to see the teaching within the principalship and see that it really would be an exciting line of work. So yes, and then I became a principal in San Francisco as my first position.
And that goes to the origin of the word principal, because it was principal teacher. It was lead teacher before it became something other than just teacher.
Right.
So I made this shift. I can still remember I was at Bernie Elementary School in Plant City, Florida, and Melissa Alonzo, who gave us some advice for this, was my assistant principal, and she put me and then my colleague Stephanie Bukowski in charge of this book talk or book study group of our educator colleagues, and that was the first opportunity I had to work with adults and engage in learning with my colleagues. And I had crazy imposter syndrome, and but we'll get into that later.
Yes,
but that was my first foray. So let's dig into it. So we're going to be talking about, again, this is Megan and my friend Carole, former teacher, and I work in supporting teacher leaders now, and former principal who works in supporting principals now. And we're going to dig into this world of working with adults. How do we make this shift? So Carole, do you have a first tip for us? A tip number 1.
So it's important that everyone knows that we crowdsource these tips. So we both have the benefit of having a lot of teacher and principal friends. So a lot of these tips are ideas that came to us from all of our teacher community, for me especially EDLD and NYCLA. So the first tip that I have is to build trust by building relationships. So one of the things that I learned actually from my mom, who's also a principal, was to be really visible, to be at the front door of your building every day. As my friend Derek said earlier today, to be the first face that the children see. Really learn the names of all of your students and also all of their parents so that they feel a connection to you. Spend a lot of time really listening to stakeholders. My friend Jordy Sparks was recommending this. Really understand the history of the community that you're serving. Be sure to share, to listen, but also to share who you are and what your vision is and what's bringing you to that school at that time. Also really to be coherent and consistent. So there are going to be times when you're not popular as a leader.
What?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's one of the hardest transitions, I think. You know, if you're a very well-liked teacher, my friend Nancy was talking about this earlier today. You know, it can be hard to have people criticize you, but it's important to have the courage to lead. And really, if you're coherent and consistent and you're following your vision that you've shared with your community, people will see your integrity and trust in what you're doing, even if they don't like it all the time.
And I feel like too, Carole, like some of that pushback with leadership is good.
Yeah.
Like some of that, it's hard to have the thick skin, whether as a principal or as a teacher leader,
right.
But some of that is good. Do you have a tip for developing that kind of thick skin and being okay to stick with your vision and kind of fend off or listen to and take in the criticism and the pushback?
One of my mentors just today, Mary Grace Booth in NICLA, was saying, and I've heard this from many great leaders, you know, if you are always thinking what is best for the students, even when the decision is hard, even when the decision is unpopular, if you're thinking about what is best for the children, I think it will give you the courage to go on.
I love that, keeping them at the center
right.
of what you're doing. And I think too that helps with like finding courage for leadership is putting your own personal fear aside and remembering that you're doing this for the children. So that kind of helps in building up that thick skin. Thanks for sharing, Carole.
Sure.
So tip number 2 that we were thinking about, and again, we crowdsourced a lot of this advice, so we have a lot of people to thank at the end. And also, I forgot to add, feel free to post questions in the comments. We are going to stop and answer questions. We'd love to bring other people in a conversation and to rely on your expertise and have you share ideas as well. So thanks to Stephanie and Amy and Michael who are already commenting in the chat box. But the tip number 2, the thing I was thinking about was embrace the waves that are going to come. There are certain things that you can prepare for, and there are certain things that you just need to know are going to come and expect them. And there's nothing you can do to prepare for them, but just know that they're coming, and that really helps. So one thing that I've struggled with was this idea of redefining success. So as a 4th grade teacher, you know, any day in the classroom, you know, one of my students has finished their first chapter book, and they are just like, you know, it's like the best moment of their day and the best moment of my day as a teacher. And that defines success for me when my students feel success. And when you're moving to working with adults, that success looks different. So making sure to keep it visible and knowing that it's going to take a longer time to come, and that, you know, working with one adult, you're going to gain a lot, but also if you're helping one adult, that has a ripple effect to many, many students. So thinking about the fact that, you know, growth and success are going to take a lot longer and it's going to look different, but keep it visible. So I'm a nerd and I keep it visible with Post-it notes. So, you know, one of my colleagues, Laura, was writing an op-ed about early childhood education funding, and we were giving her some feedback on that, and she actually got it published in 2 different sources. So, you know, I put that bad boy down, a Post-it note, put it up, and, you know, it was a way for me to keep my success visible, because our emotional buckets can get empty, our energy buckets can get empty if we don't do that. Another thing I was thinking about with this embracing the waves that are coming, you know, practicing self-forgiveness, because just because we have expertise in working with students doesn't mean we're going to have expertise yet in working with adults. There's a learning curve, right? So we have to practice self-forgiveness. And I think it was Tara Moore who talks about this idea of chrysalis time. Like, we need time to grow from caterpillar to butterfly. So practice self-forgiveness when we're in that like mushy, uncomfortable stage. You know, I think a lot about imposter syndrome, and we as teachers can feel very comfortable in front of students, but if we're in front of adults, it's like we feel like frauds. I think the term was coined by like Clance and Imes in the 70s, this idea of imposter phenomenon, where we feel like, who am I to be leading conversation with my colleagues? Who am I to be facilitating learning? Who am I to be leading a school? Who am I to be, you know, peer coaching? This is a real thing. So just knowing that it's like 70% of the population kind of struggles with imposter syndrome. I did an informal kind of survey of my colleagues, and these are national board certified teachers. These are state teachers of the year.
Very strong leaders.
Yeah, strong leaders. 98% of them were like, yep, I felt imposter syndrome at some point in my life. So know that that comes when you make the shift. And then this whole idea of guilt with career choices can also come too. I'm a Dear Sugar fan, a Cheryl Strayed fan, and one of her articles that she wrote was talking about these ghost ships and the idea that there are times in our life. Dear Sugar, Cheryl Strayed, she wrote Wild. She's a great author, and she wrote for a while for the Rumpus, and this was a Rumpus article. We actually have a list of a lot of these resources, and we're going to pop those up too in the comment box, and those will be available. But this is one of the articles available, but she talks about this idea of a ghost ship, and we make decisions in our life to go on one ship and one pathway. But there are going to be times when we look over and we look out and see this ghost ship that has the life we could have had. It has the career path we could have taken, but we didn't. And so those moments in time in leadership, we might be missing the classroom, or we might have really wanted to take this opportunity or do something else. And so we're going to have those moments and just know that they're coming, and that's okay. And just to let go of the guilt with these ghost ships when they come, and know that, you know, we've made the right choice for us, and we just need to be happy with that. So that was a longer, I just need to follow it.
That was great.
Do you feel guilt with your career choice of leaving the classroom, Carole?
I always feel guilt. Yes, absolutely. But you just have to decide that you're having the most impact that you can on the greatest number of kids that you can at a particular time, and kind of believe in that. Yeah.
I'm going to take a moment let's pause and check for questions.
Yes.
So I'm not seeing any questions. Feel free to ask them at any point in time, and we're going to stop in the midst of these tips and this conversation, and we'd love to talk about the things you want to talk about. And thanks to the magical gurus at Education Week Teacher for making that book list and that resource list appear. So,
thank you.
Carole, I think are we at tip number
3?
Well, I can't even see that. There we go. Tip 3.
All right. So tip 3, that again had many fans today when I was talking to some educators in my community. Develop your leadership network. So one of the things that I remember, and I think most teacher leaders and principals remember, is a feeling of loneliness when you become a principal. You know, you're used to having a lot of colleagues, a lot of classroom teachers. Even if they teach another grade, there's a lot of peers to talk to. And suddenly you're in charge of a school. It can be very isolating. So, you know, I think the first thing is to really be sure you have a coach or a mentor. Yes, for fans. You know, and to really be vulnerable with that coach or mentor, you know, to really be open to tips that they have, both technical in terms of time management. It can be very hard to manage your schedule as a principal. You're used to having a classroom where someone is telling you at 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock there's reading. Suddenly you have this open schedule. How do you manage your time? How do you get into classrooms enough when there's so many emergencies? Second, for the coach or mentor to help you with adaptive issues. So the more complicated shifting of mindsets that you might be trying to do with your faculty. Second, don't try to do it by yourself. So, you know, what many research studies have shown that school improvement really happens when there's distributed leadership. So have a leadership team, call on your teacher leaders, that will really be a way to build trust. So teachers see that you're really hearing them, that you're giving them leadership positions. And if you have some kind of a new initiative, to have a leadership team that's helping you to implement it, will really allow you to be successful. Finally, be sure that you have a lot of people who are in your same role that you can talk to. Whether it's joining an association or having, Thursday cocktail hour with the other principals in your district. Be sure that you have folks you can talk to, people that are going to point out, you're not eating right, you're not sleeping.
What are you saying, Carole?
That you really are, you're being real with yourself, you're being healthy. So to have folks that you can go to support you in your own personal growth as a leader and as you try to grapple with challenges in the school.
I love that. So follow-up question, Carole. Again, I'm Megan. I'm a former teacher, currently serving teachers, so teachers can leave the profession, this novel concept. We're talking about making that shift from working with students to working with adults. I'm with my colleague, Carole, who works with supporting principals and principal leadership. So Carole, you talked about this idea of finding a mentor or others who are like-minded or in similar roles. How do I do that? Do you have any suggestions? If you're a teacher leader or a principal, how do you find others?
Well, the thing that I did when I was in the pathway, becoming a principal, most states require you to do a lengthy internship. So during that period, you are going to be given a mentor. If that person is a good fit, keep in touch. Talk to them frequently. If they are not a good fit, talk to your friends and classmates. See if perhaps they have someone who, is serving as a mentor to them that you could learn from.
I love it. And I was just looking through some of the comments and ideas in the chat box. So thank you so much for adding your expertise. One thing I think about is this idea of finding your tribe. Like, how do you find those people who are going to lift you up on those days where you're feeling isolated, or you're just needing someone to vent to, or you're needing someone to problem solve with? I know for me, Twitter has been a lifesaver. So I so appreciate social networks. And I think about this idea of find your marigold. I think that was Jennifer Gonzalez, Cult of Pedagogy. It's in the document with the resources. But this idea that sorry, we're in my house, so there might be some background noise. I apologize.
There's a lot of children and dogs.
Yeah, 4 kids, 2 dogs roaming around here, and a husband, whatever. So yeah, find your marigold. So this article talks about how in gardens there is companion planting. So when you're planting vegetables, there are certain plants that are going to help other plants do well. And a marigold helps almost all vegetables do better. So thinking about how that transfers into our schools, into the Twitter sphere, like how can we find marigolds that are positive and help us do better? So find your marigold, find your tribe. And I think of the idea of having nudgers too. I think it's human nature to be complacent and to get in our comfort zone.
Stuck.
Right? And if we can find our tribesmen and tribeswomen who can help nudge us out of our comfort zones, it helps us grow too. So I love that you brought up this idea of, finding your tribe and finding your network.
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to take a moment and look through some of the questions. So from, hi Genevieve, it's so good to see you. So from John Travis, are there systems or structures you found useful for getting the most out of distributive leadership structures? I've heard some leaders struggle to make these teacher teams effective. Do you have any ideas or thoughts? That's a whopper of a question.
Hi, JT. Thanks for that question.
Is JT a colleague of yours?
Yes, he is.
JT, you're supposed to throw her a softball. Come on.
Yeah, no softball. So what was it again? What are the systems to make distributive leadership?
To get the most out of distributive leadership.
So I think one piece is it's really important not for the leadership team to be seen as the principal's favorites. So for there being some kind of call to the faculty, you really want to have, a representative group of teachers, representing, if it's elementary, K through 2, somebody from 3 through 5, somebody who's a specialist. be sure that the leadership team rotates. You don't have the same group of people year after year, so that you're really getting a lot of input from the whole faculty. The other thing is really holding yourselves accountable. I think like any other school initiative, have some kind of timeline, some set of goals, hold yourself accountable. Really in holding yourselves accountable, share what you're doing with the entire faculty, show the data that shows that you're meeting those goals.
Love it. Great, like practical on the ground tips. And I don't have the principal perspective on this with my friend Carole, who is a principal leader, so she has that perspective. But from the teacher perspective, as a former teacher, I know I've never worked in a school that has a true distributed leadership model, which, by the way, does have a principal. Like, you can have a teacher-led school that still has a principal. But I think about some of the resources that have helped us figure out how to get there and what some steps might be. Some great resources that I found there's a book called The Starfish and the Spider, which I highly recommend. The idea is that if a spider, like a spider organization, if the spider loses its head, the organization is dead. That would be like the top-down principal model of a school. The starfishy schools, the distributed leadership schools, if there's like a leg missing, there's still all these other pieces to help support it. It's still going to live and it'll grow back. That was a great read. Also, I'm thinking about teamwork with distributed leadership, and I think there can be some struggles in figuring out the dynamics of a team. There's a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Have you read that one?
No, I haven't seen it.
Love that one too. But it's like a case study. It's a business case study on the 5 dysfunctions of the team and the lessons we can learn from it. That was also another great one that made me think about distributed leadership. And I know there's a great teacher-led school network out there that, I think we are each other's best resources in trying to figure out the best structure. So JT, thanks for that softball. Boom, I think we got it. No, just kidding. We're trying to figure it out, right? And there's some other great comments in the chat box as we try to figure this out. Genevieve asks, any thoughts about balancing teacher kids with coaching adults? I do both in my hybrid role. Today was day 1, advice welcome. So I worked 1 year in a hybrid role, and I worked half-time in my 5th grade classroom in Tampa, Florida, Hillsborough County. And by the way, thinking of Florida right now and our other friends and colleagues in the Caribbean with Irma. And then, so half-time in the classroom, and the other half of my role was working for the Center for Teaching Quality. So I worked as a teacherpreneur, supporting other teachers in advocacy, policy, and instruction. And Genevieve, the one thing I found is that there is no such thing as a 50-50 role. Like, there's no halftime this, halftime that. You are all in with teaching, and most likely if you're someone that accepts one of these roles, you are all in with your hybrid role. And I think some of the greatest advice that I've gotten on balancing life, whether it's coaching and teaching or life and work, is, why do we have to have these conversations about balance? And I feel like that was from one of our grad students, Emily King, at Mount Holyoke College, and her teacher leader coach, Shanna Peebles, who was the National Teacher of the Year in 2015. But why do we have to have balance? You're going to have some part of your time or day or life that's dedicated to this, and this is not going to get that much attention. And then there's going to be other times in life where you're going to be focusing on this part or this part of your day, and then this part's not going to get that much attention. So I think it goes back to this whole idea of self-forgiveness. And then also trying to be really realistic about what you can and can't do so we don't burn out. Because I think a lot of times we try to lock too much on the plate and we burn out. So I think advice is just being realistic and practicing self-forgiveness. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is hopefully there's a principal in your school too who, really values you and who is, watching for burnout. I never had a dual role, but I have many teachers who had, teaching and coaching or teaching in some other leadership position. And, hopefully, if there is a leadership team supporting one another, folks can be looking out, making sure people are, really taking care of themselves, taking time to breathe and reflect, and not, doing too many things.
It goes back to our tribe.
Yes.
Right? Like we have to take care of one another, especially in a profession as hard and as laborious and as emotionally exhaustive and as wonderful and beautiful as education, whether it's a teacher role, a teacher leader role, or a principalship role. I just got goosebumps thinking about that. Right? Like that's so hard to do, but it's up to us to really take care of one another because we will work ourselves to the bone.
Yes.
So yeah. So my recommendation to you, Genevieve, is pour yourself a glass of wine, turn off this Facebook talk, and I think you're a newlywed. Like, go hang out with your husband. Get your brain off education for about 5 minutes. Yes, the other people are agreeing. We've got lots of likes. Yeah. So are we on tip number 4?
I think we're on 4.
What? We're on 4? Tip 4? Yeah, sorry, the lighting, So I'm going to nerd out for a second, Carole.
Please. Please do.
I'm a huge research geek, so tip number 4 is more about just sharing a few resources to learn the theoretical and research-based differences from working with students to working with adults. So piece number 1, and again, this is in the document that I think that Education Week has penned. Working with children, the art of student learning is pedagogy. Well, there's a term for the art and science of adult learning, andragogy. It was coined, I think, back in the 1800s, but the person that it's associated most with is Malcolm Knowles. So tip number 1, check out Malcolm Knowles' work around andragogy. And also, interestingly, there's a lot of pushback and conversation about, are there that many differences between working with adults and working with students? There are a lot of similarities and there are a lot of differences, some feel and some don't. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that in the chat box too. The other thing that I think has been instrumental for me is this idea of transformative learning, which I think was Jack Mesereau, which I think is like, we're in Massachusetts now. I think he was in Massachusetts, or was he at Columbia? He was up north. He was up north. But transformative learning, there are 10 stages in order to have your perspective changed, right? And as adults, we're kind of fixed in our ways and the way we see the world. And when we look at those 10 stages, we see that this kind of dystopian, like, what? That can't be right. This like pushback is one of those 10 stages of transformative learning. So if you've ever had a situation where you as a learner have been like, no, like, I just don't agree with this new math. Like, that's just not the way I learned it. And cognitive dissonance, that's a good thing. So I think that was really helpful, is learning more about Mesereau, transformative learning, and that this cognitive dissonance and pushback that sometimes we have as adults is like actually a good thing. And then the other thing I think was really helpful, and this is my last nerd alert, is the Dreyfus and Dreyfus research and the Berliner research around the development of expertise. How do we move from novice to expert as it relates to education? So check it out. Tip 4. I'm going to throw it over to Carole. I check for some more comments and questions. So Carole, do you have like a tip number 5 for us?
I have tip 5, and this one is going out to Deborah Jewel Sherman, who is one of our professors in the Graduate School of Education at Harvard, and she talks to us a lot about being an equity warrior. So as a teacher, you're very familiar with constantly assessing your students, looking at their work, thinking about what they need, making adjustments. I think one of the harder parts about becoming a leader is really taking that to scale. Really coordinating meetings regularly for all the classrooms, really looking at your school's data by subgroup, and really being honest with what it is that you see. So, asking yourself the hard questions, talking to your staff about the hard questions. Who are the children that have the access to whatever the most rigorous coursework is? Who are the children that have access to the highest quality teachers? Who are the children that don't? And when you find those answers, having the courage to really do something about it, I think is critical.
I have a question. Mm-hmm. So how do we start those conversations? Because those can be touchy. Especially with something as personal as teaching, but those equity conversations are so important to have. So how do we start those conversations?
I think that the best way to start those conversations is with the data. We can debate about No Child Left Behind, pros and cons, But I think one of the legacies of No Child Left Behind was that people did get familiar looking at data. So at this point, I think to show some data, whether it's achievement scores, graduation rates, preparedness for learning post-secondary, whatever data you feel is really showing whatever inequity is happening in your school, really being courageous enough to show it, to have the hard conversations, to do whatever it takes to really repair it.
Good advice. Good advice from the principal. And I think another conversation for another time is like, what data should we be looking at? I've read some really great stuff too on the data that we're collecting might already be slanted in the way that it's giving or what assessments and instruments we're using. So another conversation for another time.
Session 2.
Do you think too, okay, when you're bringing up, let's say you're principal going and you're going to have this conversation with your teachers, and I'm a teacher. I feel like you mentioned the word data and like my alert already goes up. Like I'm already kind of like on the defense a little bit. How do you navigate that? Because teachers we can be a really tough crowd. And probably there's some good reason why we're a tough crowd, because I feel like people have used data to beat us over the head.
Totally. So I think some data is very useful and some data isn't. And I think, again, going back to the idea of the leadership team, and talking with your teachers, having trusting relationships with your teachers, ideally I would want to say, what is the data that we really believe in as a school? Are we paying attention if we're in Massachusetts? Do we really believe in the impasse? Is that how we're going to measure ourselves? Or, are we looking at graduation rates? Are we looking at the rates of kids who are taking AP classes? How many kids of color are taking our AP classes? So whatever it is that we choose, we want to measure ourselves by. Then being really honest with the data and looking at it repeatedly, setting targets and working to meet it. So really bringing the teachers into that conversation.
I love it. I think there's a lot to unpack there. That's for our next Facebook Live. But yeah, I'd love to tease out too, like how do we bring teachers into that? Again, because I feel like data's like the, it's like a naughty word.
It's a little bit of a bad word.
It's a big bad word, but it shouldn't be, right? Like it should be a good thing. But anyway, so more questions maybe from our comment box before we move on to our tips. I love someone shared such a great idea, Christina Donahue in Florida. Hi, Christina, miss you. Hope you're safe. Again, thinking about our friends in the Caribbean and Florida. But she stated that a great mentor told her to make a T-chart, one side for current teacher leaders that are often called upon, and the other side a list of individuals that you would seek to build leadership opportunities. So I think that there's a term for that. Mark Smiley coined it, this idea of anoint and appoint. And I think I got that too, that little nugget of fact from Catherine Bassett, one of my mentors. But this idea that like appointed teacher leadership versus this organic teacher leadership. And so sometimes it seems like the same teachers are called upon. And then we could get into this whole conversation too about what's informal teacher leadership, what's formal teacher leadership. Do you have to have a title with it? But I love this idea of thinking about those who are not, whose shoulders haven't been tapped. And thinking about how we could utilize their expertise in helping, change our schools and education to make every classroom great for every student. So that's such a great idea.
That's a great point.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Christina. And I'm looking for other questions or comments. Thanks for sharing too. There's some great comments on this idea of data, of using data to drive equity conversations. And then Amanda says she doesn't feel defensive when data is mentioned. So thanks for sharing your thoughts. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. So, tip number 5, ba-boom, is actually a collection of tips from some of the people who are in the room right now. Some people who I connected with on Twitter and Facebook, and people that I really greatly admire. And I think, again, back to the idea of finding your tribe, like these are my tribesmen and women who have shared some of these great nuggets. So you ready for the first nugget, Carol?
I'm ready.
Okay. Lessons from our colleagues. This is from Tom Rademacher, by the way. He just wrote a really great book, so check out Tom Rad's book. But he says, I fell into the structure too quickly. Don't forget the urgency of teaching. Right? Like, this idea of becoming disconnected with the classroom is a really scary thing and something I think about a lot. But you forget the urgency of teaching, right? Like, what comes first? The kids and their needs. And I think we have to keep that in mind. And then Ernie Rambo from Nevada, a great NBCT and colleague of mine, also said something similar. Never forget the chaos of the classroom. That outweighs the needs of anything.
How it feels to teach all day.
Mic drop. Yeah, how it feels to teach all day. Which makes me think too, don't you feel like whether you're a principal, whether you're a teacher leader, you gotta be back in the classroom, like a little bit, like just, right? Like to stay connected. And confession, I have to renew my national boards this year. So I'm so excited to get back in the classroom, but I'm terrified. I'm terrified because I feel like after I've been out for 4 years, I haven't worked as a full-time teacher for 4 years, and I feel like I'm just going to stink at it, and I don't want to let the kids down.
Well, you've had a lot of adults.
Is that going to? Yeah, right. But like kids, but you think about like the urgency of students, of children.
Absolutely.
It's so much more than working with adults.
Yeah,
I've had a lot
more demanding, I think.
So thank you, Ernie and Tom, for helping us think about that. And I love this. So this is from Sue Creekmore, who is one of my mentors. She taught for a bazillion years in Tampa and has mentored so many national board teachers and is still involved in education, even though she has retired. Teachers never really retire. Have you noticed that too?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, some of the best ones that I've known have taught for 30 or 35 years.
Right?
Because it's a calling.
Right? It's our identity.
Right.
It's our identity. But she brought up this statement, remember that adults are not just tall children. Right? A lot to unpack there. So think about the similarities in working with adults when they're your learners, but also there's so many differences. And there's, nothing worse than feeling like someone is talking down to you. And then Amanda Zulu was sharing that, know that adults come in with so much experience and background knowledge. So think about how you can build on that when working with adult learners. And then Amanda Kunlaba, I think I just saw in the room in the comment box, was sharing a story where she assumed that the adult learners had all this background knowledge. And actually, she had some of her teachers that she was working with kind of break down because they felt kind of stupid because they were like, oh my gosh, I should know this, but I didn't. So, there's this delicate balance between recognizing all the experience and expertise they bring in, but also, not making assumptions that are going to make anybody feel bad. Knowing your learners, right?
And having an environment where people, hopefully modeled by the teacher leaders and the principal, that it's really okay to not know everything, that we are all learners. Really modeling taking risks, being vulnerable with your faculty or your PLC or whoever it is that, you're really leading, but you're constantly needing to know more.
You just went all Brene Brown on us with vulnerability.
Sorry.
Another great read though, right? But vulnerability is hard because I think sometimes with leadership, we think, of the traditional leader who has this vision and is going to lead the way and be out front, when in reality, I think there's so much leadership that happens from the middle, from behind, that allows a deep level of vulnerability, that builds trust and relationship and allows for dynamic conversations about data or whatever else, but focused around the fact that we are all learning. We are all learners.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to one of our other comments from Stacey Dodson, who is in Mississippi, and she is also an NBCT, and she's the 2010 Mississippi Teacher of the Year. But she said, allow adult learners to share their expertise. You will learn so much from them. So thanks for sharing that, Stacey. I love this one, and this kind of goes to a piece we were talking about earlier about impact. This is from Rebecca Milwaukee, who was I think she was our 2012 National Teacher of the Year. But Rebecca shared that you need to be prepared for a different pace. Small changes with even one teacher can benefit hundreds of kids. Right? Do you find that it's harder for you to see impact, Carole?
I don't think so. I think it's different. As you were talking about in the classroom, your fourth grader learns to read a chapter book. That's pretty quick. But like your audience member was saying, it might take longer to have some kind of a change take hold. It could be anything, implementing restorative practices in a school, developing a new curriculum, whatever you're doing, it is going to take longer. But then when it happens, so many children are experiencing it. So, yeah, I agree with her. You have to be patient. But I think that you see change. You see it frequently. And when you see it, it's really amazing.
Oh, that's great advice. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it happens slowly, but when you do see it, it can be amazing. So be patient. And that's where your tribe comes into effect again, to remind you that it's okay. You might not see incremental change or something impacting or, impact of your work every day, but your tribesmen and women can help you
remind you.
Remember.
They can see where you've come from.
Thank you, tribe.
Anytime.
So another one, this is from Janessa Foose, who's in Connecticut and is one of our graduate students in our Masters of Arts and Teacher Leadership program at Mount Holyoke College. And she's an amazing coach and yoga instructor. She does virtual yoga instructing too, tangential, but yeah, so check it out. But Janessa states, find ways to empower teachers and help them empower themselves. Teacher voices have been silenced for so long. Take time to truly listen. Like there's this whole different idea between listening and hearing, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like in having conversations with coaches or peer coaches or other colleagues, I think sometimes I find myself quick to offer solutions, mm-hmm. right? Because we want to help versus just really versus really listening, right? Because we want to help, we want to help. We want that impact right away. Uh-huh. So how do we take a step back, zip up our lips, and truly listen?
Uh-huh. So one of the things that they teach us in the EDLD program is something called humble inquiry, which is not something I have historically been very good at.
We're all about honesty here right now.
Yes, we're being honest. So as I was really learning about this concept, I realized that, for a long time when I had been listening, I had been sort of half listening and kind of planning what I was going to say. Right. And if you are listening in that way, you are not really hearing the person. And really, you learn so much if you can take a learning stance and really, really listen and pose questions to push that person who's talking deeper. The amount that you can learn is so much greater. So your solutions are better. You might feel good about, offering a quick solution, but if you really listen, I think the solutions, might take you longer, but I think your solutions are better.
It's like the therapy stance, right?
Yes, right, totally.
Right, your therapist, not saying that I go to the therapist or anything, but we're all about honesty here, right?
Right.
But no, there's this whole idea of no one is telling you what to do, but you come to these ideas yourself. Right. And I think that's something we do when we truly listen to someone. They tend to kind of talk themselves into thinking through solutions sometimes, and sometimes they just might need to vent. So it's becoming good at really listening and really hearing what someone is saying. And that's a really hard thing to do, to be an active listener.
Especially when you're in a fast-paced school.
Right? Where things are moving like this.
Quick.
I've got 10 minutes before I have to pick up my kids.
Out of your door. Right.
So how do we do it when we're crunched for time?
I think, a couple people that I talked to this week who are former principals talked about, I think it was Jordy Sparks, talked about really scheduling things that you wouldn't really usually think to schedule.
Like what?
So scheduling time for reflection, scheduling time for one-on-ones with teachers. You really, I think, have to schedule it. One of the things that I used to schedule too was classroom visits. Mm-hmm. So, because there's so many emergencies, as a principal, you could fully operate, in a reactive fashion, just handling emergencies. Emergencies are important. But again, if you have a team, you shouldn't be the only person who's responding. So scheduling time for reflection, scheduling time to talk to teachers and really hear them, scheduling time to spend time in classrooms is critical, I think.
And I'm listening to you say that, Carole, from like the principal perspective, and I'm thinking about how that goes across the whole spectrum. I'm thinking of Genevieve, who's talking about this, her perspectives from a 50-50. So she's coaching 50% and in the classroom 50-50. I'm thinking about my perspective, like totally out of the classroom. I'm thinking about some of our colleagues who are in the room who are teaching full time.
Just like thinking about
all of that stuff, no matter where you are on this, leadership spectrum, should apply. This idea of like scheduling time to get into classrooms, scheduling time to be reflective, scheduling, I think there's in holding those times with integrity, because we're always operating in emergency mode.
Absolutely.
That's really hard to do, though.
It is. It's one of the hardest things. You need a good, again, you need a coach, mentor, a good assistant. Your tribe that's going to encourage you and tell you not only is it okay to take that time, but it's critical. I think your most important time as a teacher, leader, or as a principal is in the classroom supporting the teachers. So, it might not feel critical, but I think you have to believe that it is.
I love it. Great knowledge bomb from Carole Learned-Miller here, talking about making the shift to adult learning. And the last one I have is from Christina Donahue. There were many more, so I just wrote down a few to share. And Christina's actually with us tonight. Christina said, seek feedback continuously. I love that idea. Also really hard, this idea of vulnerability and getting feedback, because sometimes it's hard to hear. And it's always important, though, because I think no matter what we're doing in education, we always want to learn and grow and get better and better. Any thoughts on that, this idea of seeking feedback? Did you do that as a principal?
I think I am still getting, I don't think I did it nearly enough.
I just put you on the spot there.
So it's okay, that's what this is all about. I don't think I did it nearly enough, and I think I'm only just getting better at seeing feedback as really critical, to my own learning. But I think it goes back to seeing, if you're just moving from a classroom to a school, really seeing your school as your classroom. And that doesn't mean treating your adults like children, really treating them with respect. But really thinking the way that you think about, planning lessons in the classroom, really carefully looking at student work, thinking about them as individuals, planning a lesson that's differentiated, doing that kind of planning when you are teaching professional development for the teachers. And then as a piece of it, really having a feedback loop. So the teachers are then telling you, this was what we need, this wasn't what we need, here's where we need a tweak, and then being responsive to their feedback. I think A, that builds a relationship with the teachers. B, it really improves the quality of your training. And C, I think it really models what you hope they're going to do in the classroom.
You're so smart, Carole. You should really go to Harvard and get your doctorate. Because she is. That's what she's doing. I'm sorry. I just put you on the spot. But no, I think I love where this conversation has kind of led us to, because I feel like all these pieces and tips are kind of weaving together these ideas of mentor and trust and finding your tribe and feedback and being a continuous learner. Everything is kind of, looping together. This is great planning. All right. I know you've got one more tip for us. I want to take a moment to check the chat box. So just checking to see if there's any questions. Feel free to put your questions in the chat box. Again, this is Megan Allen and Carole Learned-Miller, and we are sharing the teacher and principal perspectives around making the shift from moving with students to moving with adults. All right, it looks like we are ready for your last tip, Carole. Not that you don't have more, but like the last one we're going to share tonight.
Yes. Well, I really started talking about it in this last question that you were asking, but, really seeing your school as a classroom. I do believe one of the things that a lot of new principals will say to me is they're really afraid to leave the classroom. They really love children. They feel that, they're really talented with children, and they're going to have a loss of that part of themselves. I remember thinking the same thing, but I think if you really have the right frame of mind about being a principal, you really are the lead teacher. You're in classrooms all the time. You're developing relationships with students and with their parents who, instead of having them for 1 year, you have them for their whole career at your school.
Oh, yeah.
So I think you can reframe it. If you're worried about that loss, I'd encourage you to consider the principalship, because I think, you do have those relationships. You are teaching, so as I was talking about before, you're teaching, in a professional development workshop, but you're also teaching, on the playground. You're teaching when you meet the children out in front of the school every day. You're teaching in the cafeteria and the auditorium. So the teaching never goes away. The relationships never go away. You're just doing it at a different scale. But again, I think that the impact that you can have is really powerful.
And I don't know how it was for you, Carole, but I feel like, so just like when I lost my mom at 21, and I went through, like, you read about the stages of grief, and I hate to compare, like, losing the identity of being a teacher with losing a parent, but you read about the stages of grief, and then you actually go through them, and you're like, oh my gosh, there are these concrete stages that I went through.
These are real.
These are real things that I went through, as a young adult at 21. And I feel like when I first left and walked out those classroom doors, like I had to go through those same stages again. And it still kind of surfaces as I'm like struggling with this whole identity. Like, I identified as a teacher for so long. Am I still a teacher? Like, I am not in a classroom anymore. I know I'm a former classroom teacher, and I'm okay with that. But does that mean I'm still a teacher? Like, I still work with adults, right? Like, but there's this whole, like, being okay with going through the stages of grief, and eventually getting to the point where you do or you don't let it go, and knowing that we need, so many great people in education. We need great people in the classroom. We need great principals leading as our, instructional leaders and our building leaders. We need great people leading education nonprofits who can do, really great things for leadership. We need great people leading our districts. We need great people coaching our teachers. I feel like we need to be okay with the idea that there are these different career paths, and we need to let go, like, the grief spotlight that people put on us when they're like, oh, so you're not a teacher anymore? Like, I get it. I already feel it, right? Like, I'm going through that, but I feel like there's this, like, stigma that comes with leaving a classroom where it's almost like a bad thing, which we do have a retention problem. So I'm not saying, like, it is a bad thing, or it isn't a bad thing, but I think, we've got to let go of this idea that it's not okay to have different career paths in education. Let it go. We got to support each other and our tribesmen and women, no matter what we're doing.
Yeah, and all the roles are critical.
Right. So the last thing I wanted to end with, and this was like, I think I brought this up to you earlier. This was advice from my mentor, Sue Creekmore, and I thought there might be some pushback with this. There might not, but I don't know. It goes to this whole idea of credibility that we're kind of touching on. And Sue said, when dressed up in a clean suit, heels, you've got your nails painted, and you're coming in to work with teachers who have been sitting on the floor with their kids all day, don't say that you miss the classroom, that you lose credibility. We must be okay with all the different career paths we have chosen. And on one hand, like, I get that because I've seen it. On the other hand, I'm like, but it's okay for us to miss students. What do you think about this idea that if we come in and work with, teachers, no matter what role, there's this, like, credibility shield that comes up or goes down when you say something like, I miss teachers or I miss students? What do you think about that?
I never stopped thinking of myself as a teacher, and I would talk to my teachers about that. Yes, I was in a suit sometimes, because you're in situations where you're talking to boards or something and you feel compelled, to have a particular persona. But at the same time, I think that if you can really stay in touch, as that other audience member was talking about, really remembering the sense of urgency of the classroom,
right?
Really seeing yourself as a lead teacher, and talking with the teachers in your school as leaders too. Having this leadership team, but also seeing all of your teachers as leaders, people who are going to give you feedback and advice, and people who, when you're in their classroom, you're going to give them tips and suggestions, but you're going to be learning every day from them. Mm-hmm. I think if you have that kind of relationship with your teachers, you're not going to lose credibility, because they're going to know that at heart, what you care about is great teaching, and that's what they care about too.
I love that. Back to the relationship and trust.
Yeah.
It's all back to that, no matter if we're teaching students or teaching adults. True. It's the heart of everything we do in education. Mic drop. Boom. Carole, do you have people that you'd like to thank before we stop our Facebook Live?
I do. I have a long list of people.
What? Look at that.
They are.
Thanks, guys and girls.
These are all of these are some of my favorite former principals who were really thought partners. And what were you calling it? The team?
Your tribe.
My tribe.
That's your tribe.
This is my tribe, who was offering tips from their years as principals. Almost all of them are from EDLD or from the New York City Leadership Academy. And there's also my mom, who was my first mentor. So thank you to my tribe.
And if you are one of the tribesmen and women on this sign, you can just stop the video, take a screenshot, and send it to your grandmother, because she'll be so proud of you for helping out. No, just kidding. Sorry, I'm being silly. I'm getting punchy. It's late. It's late. So I'd like to thank some people, too. These are some people who gave sage advice from my tribe. And also, I'll post this on Twitter also. So many people that I'd like to thank, and helping us think through a few things to consider about making the shift from moving from working with students to working with adults. I feel like there's so many things we could have talked about. We just kind of, grazed the surface, but we appreciate you all being here with us. Again, this is Megan and Carole, and, so much sage advice, so many colleagues, so many people from our tribe helped to make tonight possible. We'd like to thank Education Week Teacher for giving us this opportunity. And I'd also like to point out that I think there should be more opportunities like this, where there's a principal and a teacher in the same room talking about the same things. Why are we not developing principals and teacher leaders side by side? Makes all the sense in the world, right?
Point. Yeah.
And then also, we just want to say we're thinking about those people in the Caribbean who are impacted by Hurricane Irma, and in Houston last week from Harvey, and as someone who's from Florida, thinking about all of our students, teachers, and families in Florida. All right.
We wish you all the best. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
All right. And thanks to all of our dreamers out there. We'd also like to say we support DACA.